Well, let's talk about what's going on the war front. The NATO chief actually announced that Russia must lose to Ukraine in order to send a message to China. Believe it or not, where is this headed? With us now is Dave DeCamp. He is a news editor at antiwar.com and the host of Anti-War News that you could check out on YouTube. Dave, welcome to the show.
Hey, Kim, thanks for having me.
Okay, let's first start off with this. Jan Stoltenberg coming out and saying, so he's meeting with President Biden, and he says Russia must lose in order to send a message to China. Is this really what this war is about?
Yeah, so this is, we've kind of heard this rhetoric for a while from NATO, from the US, that, Russia has to lose in Ukraine to send a message to, authoritarians everywhere that they can't use military force. Because, of course, the U.S. and NATO never use military force. But Stoltenberg, he was at the White House yesterday and met with Biden, and he specifically said that Russia must lose, so other countries like China, he mentioned China specifically, learn a lesson, or I guess is the idea, and he's, hinting at China's possible attack on Taiwan. And, this goes to show that NATO does increasingly have its eyes on the Asia Pacific. The North Atlantic Alliance is looking east. And there are plans right now. NATO wants to open a liaison office in Japan, which would be the first one in Asia, first NATO office in Asia. It's facing some resistance from Macron, the French president, who's been kind of resisting some of the warmongering when it comes to China. He recently said that Europe shouldn't follow the U.S. into a confrontation with China over Taiwan. And, he angered a lot of hawks in the U.S. when he said that. And apparently now he's also resisting this because he thinks the North Atlantic Alliance should stay in the North Atlantic. And NATO has plans to increase cooperation with what are considered, their four main partners in the Asia Pacific, which is Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, and Japan. And I know they also want to increase relations with India, and that's something the U.S. is doing. They're actually preparing for a visit from India's leader, Modi, and they want to increase, arms sales and military cooperation with India. So this is all part of the plan, to start building up more around China.
So do you think there's a possibility in the future where they really truly extend NATO and they start bringing in like Australia, South Korea, Japan, New Zealand? Do you think there's a possibility that they would do this? I mean, they said they would never expand it all the way to where they have now. So what's stopping them, right?
That's true. Yeah, I think that what's stopping them would be the resistance from Europe. I would be surprised if all the countries that have pretty good relations with China, and it's clear that the EU, a lot of countries in the EU don't want to follow the US in this economic war against China that the US has been launching. So I think that's what might stop it. And again, you never know, how things could change in the next few years. But I think really we might see a new kind of NATO, a PATO, a Pacific, alliance.
Well, we have AUKUS.
And the U.S.
Right, and that's the Australia,
that's all part
UK.
of this.
Yeah, so they are kind of creating new alliances, but it seems like NATO is just growing into this behemoth, and they're wanting it to continue being a behemoth. And perhaps they would want to absorb other countries, and then it's just if you're the lone country going against all of these countries in the world, it really truly would be a world war if there was something like that to break out. But what I'm curious about is what Biden's reaction was when Jan Stoltenberg, when he says we can't let Russia win, otherwise China's going to see this. I mean, was Biden like, yeah, you're right, we can't let Russia win? Do we know what his reaction was on this, or was he just smiling and nodding like, I don't even know who you are?
Yeah, that's what it looked like he was doing. But that is the rhetoric. Like I said, if Biden has said similar things, and this is kind of because there is actually divide now in DC. You have the ultra China hawks who actually think the U.S. should wind things down in Ukraine, and that's not really reflected by many people in Congress. For the most part, everybody's still all in on Ukraine. But from what I understand, even within the Biden administration, there is, China hawks who do think the U.S. should kind of try to put more focus on, sending weapons to Taiwan and, winding down things in Ukraine. So when the defense of that is, well, no, we have to support Ukraine because it'll send a message to China that, we're united and that they can't get what they want, again, through force, through invading Taiwan. But it's just two completely different things, of course. And like I was saying, France, I think, has made clear that if something did happen, say right now, between the US and China, I don't think Europe is going to come and get involved
Hmm.
militarily. The US would be more on its own. And even the US
Yeah.
allies in the region, Japan and South Korea, even Australia. Australia is going along with AUKUS, but they're actually still, debating the idea of, do we actually want to go to war with China over Taiwan? They're going to kind of make it inevitable because the U.S. is building up, new military bases in Australia. That's also part of this AUKUS deal that gets Australia these submarines. So, they're heading in that
Yeah.
direction, but
But
not
China's
everybody wants to
countering
do
it.
this.
You're right. And the way that China's been countering it in the region, if you pay attention to the trading percentages, is that they've just been becoming the largest trading partner for all of these countries. So if they go to war with China, there's a real economic problem there for these nations. So China's been sort of outsmarting the military strategy, which is build a base, give some subs. And then China says, just trade with them to the point where they're so economically dependent on you that they couldn't possibly pick a fight with you. And that seems to be
Mm.
what's going on there. The United States used to be the number one trading partner for most of our allies in that region, but now it's China. Some areas like Japan, it's neck and neck. They get the same amount from the United States as they do from China, but only 10 years ago or 5 years ago, that wasn't the case. Same thing with South Korea and Australia. Taiwan, certainly China's their number one trading partner. I just have a difficult time believing that they would even want to go into a blockade type warfare with China, knowing that it would cut them off from all of their resources. Who else are they going to get them from? Especially when these other countries are like, well, we get our resources from China, so we can't then ship you the resources. We're already, it would be a very different type of war, a very different type of strategy over there. I'm not sure how that plays out. So I'm not sure if this is really sending China a message when it wouldn't even be a similar type of warfare. China doesn't have to step foot on Taiwan. They just have to blockade, surround. That's what they would need to do, cut it off from the rest of the world, and then get them to surrender without even stepping foot on shore. It's kind of one of those antiquated viewpoints of needing to invade. Russia and Ukraine, that's very different. You've got part of Ukraine is Russian ethnic speaking, identifying, and they were already in a civil war for 8 years with the Ukraine nationalists. Taiwan doesn't have that situation. China wouldn't need to. What's the point of invasion when a country invades? They're doing it because they're, a lot like historically to the imperial reason. You go in, you want to put your people there, you want to take the land. And it's like, so is China going to go and invade Taiwan and put a bunch of Chinese people on Taiwan who speak Chinese and eat Chinese food? Pretty sure they're already there. So I don't know.
Uh,
It's an odd strategy. Let's talk about the.
yeah, and
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's an important point because it's missing from the rhetoric is just the fact that an invasion is not in China's interest at all, and it's clearly not what they want to do. They don't want to use
Right.
military action. They would
Not like
prefer to
that anyway.
solve the yeah, and blockade. And I think it did open a lot of people's eyes when Nancy Pelosi went to Taiwan last year and China simulated that blockade. It showed how quick that can happen. It is right
Yeah,
off China's
because they're
coast.
right there, right? It would be
Yeah,
much
yeah.
harder for us to go and send the subs. I mean, I know we got Philippines and Japan and South Korea, but still, you got to get over there. They're right off of China's shore. China really, the strategy there is so different. And I really think China's strategy is economic. They're just going to say, we're just going to become so important to you, more important to you than them, that you will choose us over them when the time comes. And they're
Mhm.
patient. And so I think that's just the game. They're patient. I think what they're worried about is us striking first and putting them in a position where they have to do something. And yet the rhetoric coming from the West is, no, we're worried China's going to do something. And in the event that they invade Taiwan, we got to go do something. And I don't think the Chinese are looking at it that way. They're thinking, what if they do something first? Then we've got to counter that. But ultimately, it's a long game to them, an economic long game, economic warfare, and they're winning it at this point. So they're just staying the course. Um, Speaking of economics, I do want to talk about the new aid. This is an arms package, more money to Ukraine. What's the new deal with this? How much money are we giving them this time?
Yeah, so this new weapons package that was announced by the Biden administration this week, it's worth $325 million. So they say. There's been some discrepancy over how much these weapons are worth that they're sending. The Pentagon seems to be finding new money they're devaluing weapons. But anyway, so this is $325 million, and it includes Bradley fighting vehicles and Stryker armored vehicles that Ukraine has been losing in its counteroffensive. So it's interesting to see the counteroffensive started early last week, and there's been reports that Ukraine is losing these Bradleys, also their German-made Leopard tanks. And U.S. officials speaking to the media have said, "Oh yeah, we're sending these Bradleys to replace the ones that they're losing." So it's just seems so quick that that they're already sending things over to replace what they're losing in the counteroffensive. And they're sending this using what they call this presidential drawdown authority, which lets Biden take weapons straight from Pentagon stockpiles and ship them right there, so they could do it pretty quickly.
Wow.
And according to the Pentagon, this new package means that the U.S. has pledged over $40 billion in military equipment for Ukraine since the invasion. And that's just in military equipment alone. There's other types of spending, economic aid, training. Some of that money that the U.S. has authorized to spend on Ukraine just goes right to the Pentagon to refill its stockpiles and to pay for troop deployments. Specifically, the Pentagon sending things over there, over $40 billion. So and that's just what they're telling us.
Right.
So it's just such a huge amount of money in military equipment.
Now, some of the arms that we're sending, I hear, is you've written here in antiwar.com, depleted uranium rounds. We're sending depleted uranium rounds now.
So it looks like we're going to. The Wall Street Journal reported yesterday that the Biden administration has decided to send depleted uranium rounds to Ukraine for use with the Abrams tanks. Those are the U.S.-made heavy tanks that are expected to get to Ukraine by the end of the year. And depleted uranium is a very controversial munition. What depleted uranium is, the material, it's a byproduct of enriched uranium. It's not as radioactive as enriched uranium, but it is still radioactive. And, the U.S. used depleted uranium quite a lot in Iraq. In the first Iraq war, during the Gulf War, it's estimated that they used, 1 million depleted uranium shells, and cancer in Iraq during the 1990s spiked after that. And they also used it in the, during the invasion of Iraq, especially in Fallujah, the Iraqi city that was destroyed, multiple times after the invasion. And, the U.S. didn't just use depleted uranium there. They also used white phosphorus, which is another horrific chemical weapon that burns your skin. And in Fallujah today, there's an account on Twitter that shows birth defects in Fallujah. Babies are born so deformed that they they can barely survive outside of the womb, and they die within a few days. So that's what depleted uranium does. It poisons the land, and Ukraine is a farming agricultural country, so it has a lot of implications. And the British already have sent depleted uranium. They're always a few steps ahead of escalations in this war to use with their Challenger 2 tanks. And Russia said that they would treat the use of depleted uranium the same as a dirty bomb. And Putin announced that he was sending nukes to Belarus after the British sent the depleted uranium, and he said that was a response. Now, he also said it was something they were planning, but he did specifically say that it was a step in response to the British sending depleted uranium. So does that mean that there's going to be another response to the U.S. sending it? It's not clear.
Right. Lastly, let's circle back to NATO and talk about, you mentioned before we came on air that there's a conference that they're putting together, and what is it that they're planning to do?
Yeah, so the big NATO summit this year is going to be held in Vilnius, Lithuania this July. And there's a lot of debate going on because Ukraine wants a new commitment from NATO. We all know back in 2008 at the Bucharest summit, NATO declared that Ukraine can eventually become a member. It's a very vague guarantee that they gave them. But Ukraine's never been given a timeline or a concrete path to membership. And the more hawkish NATO members, the Eastern European countries and the British, they want to give Ukraine some sort of roadmap to membership, just a new commitment. And there's been a lot of debate going on. There's been a lot of reporting about this. And again, that's how it kind of falls right now. It's Eastern Europe, Baltic states, Poland, the UK. They want to give something pretty serious. And then when it comes to France and Germany, they're not as keen on the idea, but they all agree that they want to give some sort of new commitment to Ukraine. And the most popular idea seems to be the Israel model, as they call it, which means signing, a few-year deal for military aid, but it wouldn't go as far as the Article 5 mutual defense guarantee. And it seems like President Biden is hesitant to give them any sort of actual path to membership.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing that we're going to see some sort of long-term military aid guarantee. Whatever it is, Russia's main demand has been Ukrainian neutrality. Whatever it is, it's going to prolong the war. We can
Right.
just guarantee that. So yeah, this could be a pretty pivotal summit that's coming up. The same as the Bucharest summit in 2008 that was so consequential, because when they gave Ukraine that pledge at the time, William Burns, who is the current CIA director, was the U.S. ambassador to Russia, and thanks to WikiLeaks, we know that he warned Condoleezza Rice, before that Bucharest summit, Ukrainian entry and Georgian entry into NATO is the brightest of all red lines for the Russians, as he put
Wow.
it, for the Russian elite, not just Putin. So, they were warned and they did it anyway, and now it's very
Right.
clear what more commitments will
Right. Russia
result in.
said, we meant it when we said it, and they certainly have meant it. I don't understand it though. To me, it's so stupid, and it's stupid on so many levels because, for one, if you're Ukraine at this point, why are you asking for? They didn't. You're not in NATO now. You're invaded. You're invaded, and NATO's not there to help you. So what is the point of asking for it for the future? Like, well, in case we get invaded again, like this was the time you needed it, if you needed it, right? Is to prevent the
Mm.
invasion that you're already in the middle of. So it doesn't make any logical sense to me why they would want to continue pushing for NATO involvement. Like, well, we might get invaded. You're invaded. So there's no, NATO didn't come to your rescue. That you got screwed. You got totally royally screwed on that. So why even trust NATO at this point? Why continue trusting the West at this point? I would be pivoting to your neighbor and saying, let's make a deal. We're going to have to make a peace deal because
Mhm.
I'm going to have to live next to you for the rest of my life. I don't have to live next to the United States. They're way over there across an ocean, right? So that to me just makes zero sense whatsoever. And then it's such an empty promise for NATO to be saying to Ukraine as they're invaded by Russia, like dangling it, like one day we'll give you NATO membership to help you prevent an invasion from Russia. I mean, why are we still having this stupid conversation? It makes no sense for any party involved to be talking about it. The only thing that what you're mentioning is like some sort of long-term arms agreement or something along those lines that would continue pissing Russia off. That is certainly something that, I could see them say, okay, well, we'll do it this way, and Russia continuing to be upset about that. But again, it's not in Ukraine's best interest. And Ukraine should just say, I've got to get along with my next door neighbor. That's more important than anything because they're not going away. Unless, the game plan is to make Russia somehow go away, which I think is kind of the ultimate game plan, is to take it over, is to somehow collapse it, regime change. They view that as an existential threat, and they're not going to tolerate it. That will result in World War III. That will result in a nuclear conflict.
Mhm.
So I don't know.
Yeah.
People have lost their minds. But
Yeah. I mean, and you think about the NATO membership, like you mentioned, they were dangling it in front of Ukraine. I always think back in March 2022, like right after the invasion, Zelensky did an interview with CNN. And he said in that interview that, because in the lead up to the war, he was asking about Ukrainian membership. And he said that he asked, give us a timeline, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. And he said that he was told there will be no NATO membership for Ukraine, but publicly the door will remain open. So you have to wonder why,
so I'm just
why
using
was
you,
that? What exactly? Yeah,
right?
I mean, and that makes you think that they intentionally tried to provoke Russia
Of
because that
course.
was one of Russia's main security demands. If they know that, okay, they're not actually joining NATO, why not give Russia that in writing? It could have
Yeah.
prevented, all of this.
And Ukrainian officials were corrupt enough to take that deal. That's ultimately what happened. They all got bought off and they said, okay, we'll sell the country off and the citizens with it into a war to continue this charade so that the Westerners can posture against Russia and there could be a lot of money made off of war. I mean, it's sickening, absolutely sickening. Dave DeCamp, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate all the work you're doing at antiwar.com. Dave DeCamp is the news editor there. You can read all of his articles. He's got lots of stuff coming out every single day. You can also watch his show on YouTube. Anti-War News with Dave DeCamp, which is also very informative. So Dave, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Kim.
Now, I'm someone who doesn't sleep well, and my 11-year-old shepherd is getting older and has some aches and pains. And this is why I look into cbdistillery.com for a natural way to help me get some sleep and to give my furry family member the relief that she needs. CB Distillery has over 2 million satisfied customers. 90% of customers report that they sleep better with CBD. 81% said CBD helps them with stress. 80% said CBD helps with aches and pains after physical activity. Those are really good numbers. So good chance it's going to help you out. So if you struggle to get a good night's sleep, if you're dealing with too much stress and could use a little calm in your life, if you suffer with pain and discomfort, especially after physical exercise, try CBD from the source that I trust, cbdistillery.com. You'll get 20% off of your order when you enter my name, Kim, at checkout. There is no prescription required for these products. So head to cbdistillery.com, use the promo code Kim for 20% off.